Welcome to another edition of The Conversation here at the Dakota. I am Jonathan Starr. Today I'm joined by, we'll say recently elected chair of the North Dakota Republican Party, but it's been a couple months. It was June. We're feeling the weather change. It's no longer summer, but thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate being invited on.
Absolutely. So first off, what kind of the reasoning behind being interested or willing to run for the chair of the Republican Party? Obviously, huge responsibility, and that's the middle of a tug of war there.
Yes, indeed it is. So speaking specifically to your first question of what made me interested in running for the position, I've long held the belief that civic duty is paramount to being a participant in a society that believes in self-governance. Uh, I think that extends a long ways beyond, what people typically think of when they think of, what's my civic duty. They think, well, it's to show up and vote every 4 years
Yeah.
and to try and get out of jury duty any chance I get. I think it's a lot more than that. So the my predecessor, the prior state party chair, had elected not to run for re-election. So the chair was going to be vacated and open at the June election. I had several people that I have, long worked with in the party that asked if I would consider stepping up and filling that they thought maybe I had certain talents that could benefit the party. And again, I think when you're called, you need to seriously consider stepping up and doing that, and that's what I did.
Right. So far, as you have enjoyed that journey, how has it gone? Has it been a pretty smooth transition? How's it gone so far?
Yeah, I was aided greatly by my predecessor, Sandy Sanford. She did everything within her power to make the transition as smooth as possible. She's a very detailed person.
Yeah,
She took the position very seriously and was very accommodating in helping me get my feet underneath me. So very much appreciate her efforts.
absolutely. So jumped right into the fire right there. That's the pressing thing of why is Matthew Simon with us today? But who are you? Away from the fire of the Republican Party, who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself as we jump into this.
Sure. I'm a father of four. I'm not originally a North Dakota native, but I've lived here since 2008, so for quite some time. Actually grew up in Colorado back in the 80s and the 90s when it was still a Republican majority state, but the writing was certainly on the wall around the turn of the century when I had moved away. It had started progressing more purple as a state, and then ultimately now I wouldn't recognize the state if I went back to it, so that's disheartening. And
Hmm.
I'd lived in a couple other states briefly around the Midwest as I was getting my career established and my family going. But ended up coming during the Great Recession to North Dakota because there was ample opportunities for work here. Very much enjoyed everything outside of the weather here, but I suppose we all have to contend with that. Um, Professionally, I work in the energy industry and I work in finance specifically. I've worked in accounting and finance for about 20 years now. Um, really enjoy the work that I do. It's productive. It is building the state. It's building beyond the state. And There's just, in a world of services industry, it's a nice feeling to be able to put physical steel in the ground and
Right.
make generational legacy asset investments.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you have that background and you moved to North Dakota. Obviously, you talked about the change. We're twins in the fact that we both moved here in '08. Great state. Cold didn't run us away. But what provoked you to get into politics? Was that something that you had already been kind of dabbling when you were in Colorado, or did that happen more recently since you had moved to North Dakota?
Yeah, so when I was in Colorado, I was still, in my formative years. I've always had an interest in politics and always engaged in a lot of lively debate from, the time I was really young. It's been a passion area of mine because it was modeled to me by my father.
Hmm.
He too was somebody that was very civically engaged and believed that he had an active participant obligation in his society. Um, Obviously, wanting to pattern myself after my dad, I started getting involved in an unofficial capacity, again, back in my teen years.
Right.
Um, it was really more after the move to North Dakota that I started getting formally engaged in party politics and have volunteered in all manners of different levels of the North Dakota Republican Party, helping candidates, helping amend bylaws in districts, helping write legislation for legislators of similar bends. I've just tried to donate my talents anywhere that I thought they may be useful.
Right. Absolutely. So as you jumped into that, one of the things that I think is neat about North Dakota is the accessibility of things. The opportunity is much more abundant here, I believe, and maybe that's due to the fact that we are a smaller state and smaller communities. Did that play at all into your ability or your reasoning to jump into politics and being more in the involved areas of involvement?
Yeah, I fully agree with that sentiment. North Dakota is really unique in the accessibility of our elected officials, and I think that makes our state a gem.
Right.
Um, it can be disheartening in larger populous states, the inability to reach your elected officials, and I think that dissuades a lot of people from being involved because it just doesn't seem tangible.
Right.
Like, is my voice actually going to be heard, or is it just a mindless, faceless blob of bureaucracy out there? So North Dakota is unique, and that certainly encouraged me to pursue the route that I've pursued.
Now, as you stepped into this role and have been in this role, I say step into this role. You have conventions that are going to be coming that are right around the corner that you're getting ready for. I don't know that there's an easy time to jump into this role that you're in. Politics is always happening, but one of the priorities that has been mentioned or that has been floated around is about healing the perceived divide that is in the party. How do we do that? Feels like maybe we need a strong Democratic Party in order to help heal the divide. How do you see that as chair of the Republican Party?
Having a supermajority is both a blessing and a curse.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously a blessing in that, in theory, we all share a vast amount of values, and that's why there's so many people who identify with the Republican Party in the state. Um, where it can become maybe a little complicated is that unlike our friends on the Democratic side, who tend to be more collectivist in nature, more hive-minded,
Right.
they tend to latch onto something and all swim in the same direction, whereas Republicans tend to be individualists. We're stubborn and independent thinkers, and I think that's a beautiful thing. But it does make collaboration across a large group a little bit more difficult than people who don't have quite the same bent of that individuality.
Right. For sure. So how do you think you get to unite the party though? Because like you said, take the controversial topic of abortion. And on the Republican side, there's some that feel like it needs to be abolished in the state completely. There's some that feel like we have strong abortion laws and we're happy where they're at. And maybe they, at the end of the day, have similar viewpoints on the topic, but they have different ways of getting around it. And like you said, there's that individualistic approach that each has of, no, it has to be this way. It needs to be this way. How do you unite that where the Republican Party can focus on that shared goal of whatever it might be, whether it's abortion, whether it's taxes, whether it's energy and infrastructure, whatever it might be that we're working on? How do we possess that in the state?
I think it's a fool's errand to believe that you can force everybody to agree with you on all issues, especially the hot topic issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the best way to address that is at an individual level, you have to be very clear about what is a principle and what is a policy, because those are two entirely different things.
Right.
You mentioned abortion. To me, that's a principle. That's a close-handed issue, and that's not one where you should be willing to do a lot of compromising.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Policy issues, on the other hand, if you are so stuck in the mud on your position on every individual policy, then you're not going to be able to effectively work with other people and get the ball advanced. That's one place where I think the Democrat Party has had a lot of success with its long march through the institutions. Is that they believe in, on a policy standpoint, of incrementalism, incremental
Right.
change over a long period of time. And again, speaking specifically to policy, I think that that's an effective manner and advancing the ball. But again, just delineating between principle and policy is important. And I think people ultimately respect when you're principled and you don't move on those principles. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to agree with you. And, you used abortion as a fantastic example of a principal issue where there's going to be disagreement.
Right.
I think it's important for people to know where you stand. I am very much against abortion. I think that it is a stain on this nation, and that future societies will look back with disgust at the fact that we permitted it. It's akin to sacrificing babies in the Valley of Ben Hinnom in the Old Testament. I just think it's thoroughly disgusting.
Right. And it seems like, and some would say it goes back to when we had the philosophy, or maybe we still do, in the Republican Party in North Dakota, of the big tent policy, a philosophy where let's have a big tent, let's welcome people, let's be kind, and let's just grow the party. It seemed like that was a focus that was had for many years, and what that has created is a huge variance in the belief system. So then now we have the idea of rhinos that creep in, Republican in name only, these terms that creep into the political game. I guess the question on that is we're kind of working off the idea of abortion. And like you said, it's a good one, but it's also a difficult one because it is a principle and somebody needs to hold true to their principles no matter what. But there's this idea that some people just aren't Republican. And so how do you, while people are working off their principles and maybe they still follow that party platform generally, how do you view that? Is there a deal where the Republican Party's in trouble because it's invaded by people that are not Republicans, or how does that big tent philosophy carry over as you see it into the future?
I'm glad that you used the terminology "big tent" because that is thrown around flippantly, and I think superficially, a lot of people hear the term "big tent" and think it's accommodating and it's welcoming, so it by necessity is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll say that the risk is that when the tent comes to be a certain size, there are a lot of corners for camels to stick their noses under. And that speaks specifically to what you were just saying, that um, if we're bringing people in and they are acclimating to shared values, then we should be bringing in as many people as we can convert. And that's incumbent upon all of us to try and express the principles of the Republican Party and then get buy-in from other people and grow the party in that way. Now, if we're growing this tent by relaxing our standards and not touching on hot topic things, then I think that that's a foolish way to try and get extra numbers, because eventually, using your tent analogy,
Right.
you're not adding any additional polls, you're expanding the tent, and all of a sudden you don't have stability in the party because we just don't have things that we universally agree on anymore.
Right.
And at the end of the day, the North Dakota Republican Party, just like the Democrat Party, it's a voluntary association, it's a private organization. And like any private organization, it has standards. And I think we need to be very careful about relaxing standards in an effort to grow. I've seen this not just in party politics. I've seen this in the seeker-friendly church movement. Where messages that are uncomfortable get watered down in an attempt to grow numbers. And I would rather see us hold firm to principles and do a better job on selling why those principles are correct.
Right. A lot of great points that are brought up there. One of them you mentioned is kind of the party is a private organization, and something that the party has ran into over the last couple of years is due to the perhaps division that is within the party. So a lot of conversations about primaries and about the district conventions that are being held. How do you see this? Is this something where it feels like the district convention, when they go and they endorse a candidate, it holds no value? It only holds value if you win the primary. Is that the way that it should be, or should we get rid of primaries in North Dakota?
Yeah, that is something that my team and I are actively engaging on. We're trying to come up with several different manners in which we can address that. I will say that as a private political party, we
Mm-hmm.
should have the right to nominate our candidate for the general election. The way that certain provisions of North Dakota Century Code are currently written, they basically supersede our endorsement process. And then they allow, given that North Dakota doesn't have voter registration and has open primaries, they allow anybody who can get the requisite number of individual signatures to get on the primary after an endorsement convention has been held and the party has chosen its nominee. This person that gets onto the primary can self-identify as Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, whatever they would like,
Right.
because it's allowed in our current structure. And I think that's, first of all, that's a violation of freedom of association of the political party as a private organization, the way that Century Code is currently construed to allow that to happen. And secondly, I think the risk here is that we are democratizing with a small d a process that's supposed to be a constitutional republic.
Mm-hmm.
As a constitutional republic, again, we voluntarily associate with people that share our values. We pick from amongst us somebody to run for a governmental position, even though as a party, we are not a governmental organization.
Right.
And then we try and get, those people elected to advance the values that we collectively hold. The primary is much more, hearkening to closer to a direct democracy style, which I personally don't favor. Every democracy in the history of antiquity has committed suicide. It's failed under its own weight,
Okay. Yeah.
because um, people just don't have the same level of buy-in, and they don't
Right.
take their engagement as seriously.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you talk about that effect that the state century code has on how the primary and the endorsing process works for the party. Then there's a second factor in this, and I think this is interesting because it received some attention a couple years ago, for better or for worse. But how the individual districts work at their endorsing processes, and of course, each district has their own bylaws. Is that something that you see as being a good structure for the party, where you continue to have each district to have their own bylaws, and it can vary district to district, and is just reported back, or should there be a consistent set of bylaws that's used by every district that might be input by the district chairs and ran through the party chair as you are?
That's one of the great balancing acts that I'm tasked with addressing, and the state Republican Party is tasked with addressing right now. Um, I believe that the organization that's closest to the people being represented is usually the best. So I don't favor a top-down approach of
Right.
the state party coming in and dictating what the bylaws should be for each district. I like the fact that the districts have some degree of latitude there. Now, I think having a skeletonized structure for what is appropriate in those bylaws that would conform to the rules that we as a party at the state level have agreed to, I think that that's imperative. And some of that already does exist. Actually, there's a fair amount of infrastructure in place to that effect. But do I think that it could be strengthened? Yes. And we're exploring some ways of looking to do that without, again, violating the fact that we want as much autonomy at the direct representation level as possible.
Right. No, that makes sense. And definitely the districts have the greatest feel of what's happening. District chairs, district leadership has the greatest feel of what's happening in their local areas. And so that is completely understandable. Something, and I feel like we are going through, I told you beforehand, typically the first interview maybe not as hard. I feel like we are hitting some deeper topics. So sorry about that, just where the conversation has taken us. But continuing down this direction, one of the interesting things about, I believe, and I don't have data in front of me, so I could be incorrect, but I believe that's a little bit applicable to North Dakota in its unique place, is that there's actually in my understanding, a small membership that's actually part of the GOP party. There's a lot of people that have input, ideas, and all that, but as far as dues paying people, it picks up maybe next year when there's a convention and things like that. But in the off year, there's not as much. Is there a way? There probably is a way, but are you looking at ways to go ahead and increase that membership so that's something that people would be willing to be part of year over year?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think you're spot on some of the struggles that we have with the way that North Dakota approaches, a biannual legislature, for example.
Yeah.
In order to run as a Republican, one of our rules is that you have to be a dues-paying member. But since the legislature is only meeting once every second year, historically we've had drop-off in membership where when legislators are in session, which is not on an election year, then the adherence to the requirement of paying dues has dropped off precipitously. And this is a cyclical pattern that I've been able to trace back for a number of years. And then during election year, the membership jumps up pretty substantially for people seeking office. As far as people outside of elected officials, just private members of the party, that's something again that we're tasked with selling our brand.
Right.
That's fully incumbent on each of us. That if we want to grow that membership from private citizens, then we need to do a good job selling who we are and what our vision is and what we believe in. And that's what we're looking to do.
Right. So as you look at that and maybe even other things, as you step into this role, you've been in this role for a few months, what are some of the metrics or what are some of the goals, the things that you are looking at as KPIs in the business world, a key point indicator to determine whether or not that you're seeing that continued success and that continued growth in the Republican Party that I'm sure a lot of the constituents would want?
Well, high level on the financial side, there's some very basic, and then KPIs is a great term for it. The sheer volume of members is important. The percentage of those members that are active dues-paying members in their district, I would say, is another one. The amount of interest and electors that we bring to the state convention, I think that's a key one that we're looking at. Outside of financial metrics, which are a little easier to quantify, we have maybe more qualitative goals that we're looking at. But a lot of that again comes back to branding efforts, how we diversify some of our messaging strategies, some of our fundraising strategies. Again, I know this is pretty high level and not too deep into the woods, but we've got a number of different things that we're juggling to try and represent our brand and our party as best as possible.
Absolutely. So we look at metrics and those qualitative things. What about just kind of the initiatives as you more in a visionary role, which is the unique place that you get to play where you have to look at the metrics and that hard data, but you also have that vision of where the party's heading. What do you see some of the goals or the North Stars that perhaps the party would be looking to over the next couple of years?
I think we need to seriously address a previous question that you had about how much teeth the party has in enforcing its nominees and bringing them to the general election. That is going to be a major battlefield, whether any of us choose to engage or not. That's happening. So that is something that I think we need to actively get in front and, again, make the sales pitch for why we think that the primary is antithetical to a representative republic, and the endorsement convention makes a lot more sense. That will be a big one. There's also, sometimes things that have worked for a long time because they work. Sometimes those techniques become dated, and you need to adapt and improvise and overcome and be flexible. The mannerisms for fundraising for the party, in order for the party to have the resources necessary to support its candidates and get people elected, I think some of those are starting to become antiquated. And even where they still work, there's some risk in, it's much easier if you can find a limited handful of people who can write a big check. That's a more efficient use of time generally. The risk there, though, is that people are self-interested.
Right.
All of us are self-interested, and people do not write those kind of checks without expectations. Sometimes those expectations align with the party platform, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And sometimes maybe they're a bit more self-serving because we're all fallen human beings.
Right.
The alternative fundraising methods that we're exploring, democratize, and again, small d, our fundraising efforts out to a much broader number of people. And I think that helps with civic engagement. That also helps, you know, mitigate some of that risk of giving overrepresentation to a handful of people who can write large checks. So that's certainly something on the vision casting scale that I think is very important for us to address and get in front of.
Yeah, very good. We do a deal here at the Dakota, and when somebody is their first time on, we don't do it every time, but we do it a lot of times, where we do rapid fire round, and it kind of breaks the pace of the interview. So here we go. Most of these questions don't matter. One or two might, so I guess be careful for those, but most of them don't. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Good man. Coffee or energy drink?
Both.
Both. Morning person or night owl?
Morning person.
Very good, very good. Favorite North Dakota season?
Spring.
That's a season in North Dakota.
Well, it's the best 3 weeks of the entire year.
Absolutely. The one this year was incredible. We had 90-degree weather in May, and we had a wonderful spring in August. It was quite the year.
Is it too late to change my answer to early fall?
Yeah, exactly. iPhone or Android?
Android.
Oh no, that's a bummer. Favorite restaurant that you've had maybe throughout the state? Because you've been kind of doing a tour of the state a little bit. So favorite restaurant either throughout the state or at home base?
At home base here, the Longhorn Steakhouse is really fantastic. I don't eat out very often because I think financially it's just not a very good use of your money, and it's not overly healthy either, but I sure like that place.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, if you weren't in politics, what would you be doing? So I'll change it this way, because you do, if you weren't involved voluntarily in politics, what other place would you be willing to volunteer in? What are some of the other passions?
I really like mentoring the up and coming generation. And maybe one of the reasons that I gravitated into politics is because it gave me the opportunity to, effectuate some change that I wanted, but it also opened an opportunity to mentor younger people. I think it is critical to give people the sense of buy-in into our society. So however I could manage to have that effect on people, I think that's where I would look to be involved.
That's a really great value there. If you could have lunch with any political leader, past or present, who would it be?
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson. Why? We'll end here with the rapid fire, but why Thomas Jefferson?
I've spent a great deal of time reading the works that Jefferson wrote back in his day, and I just think that he was quite possibly one of the most brilliant people that ever called himself an American. His values, I think, were maybe not impeccable because we differed in some places, but they were very good. And again, I just really respect his level of intelligence and ambition.
Absolutely. All right. So around the corner, we have a GOP convention state convention that's coming up. And we couldn't find any place of where it was going to be held. Do we have any details on this yet? And that's kind of the fun information, but also is there anything that we should expect that comes out of that convention that is going to be really a foundational for the party?
We have a contract in hand. However, it has not been signed yet, so I'm reticent to put that information out there publicly until we do have all those I's dotted and T's crossed. But plan on the end of March, and we'll certainly give more details as soon as the ink is dry on that contract.
Absolutely. And I'm sure the planning for the convention is a little bit early, but is there any thing that we should anticipate? Obviously, you're going to have the business that's being taken care of, but it also seems like there's a little bit of direction that comes out of that. What is some of that? Maybe a preview into some of that we can expect.
Yep, the planning is well underway right now. We've been at this for several months. We're bringing on the right people to make sure that this is a successful production. As far as direction coming out of that, I'm going to keep some of that a little close to the chest for now too, but suffice it to say some of the things that we've discussed here, I think are going to be expounded upon there.
Absolutely. looking forward, I know we've looked at the vision and stuff like that, but for the Republicans in the state of North Dakota, we're based in Minot, so in Minot, but also in the state of North Dakota, why? What is it about the Republican Party that they should be looking forward to out of all the division that gets highlighted, it gets magnified a lot? The division, that's probably one of the first words that might come to someone's mind when you talk about the Republican Party if you're in the know in the state. But for you, as you look at it, and you look at maybe someone that'd be interested in joining, or someone that'd be interested in volunteering, becoming more involved, why should they invest into the party right now?
Well, speaking to the concept of divisiveness within the party, uh, because we are a supermajority party and the Democrats are largely ineffectual in this state,
Mm-hmm.
it does draw a lot of media attention to any minor tiff. And when you do
Right.
have a large group of people, inevitably you're going to have disagreements. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think where we all need to be a little cautious is how much of the grievances we air publicly, as opposed to just talking directly to the person that we have a disagreement with.
Mm-hmm.
If more of us were a little bit more principled in that manner, it would make the sales pitch to this potential new Republican that you mentioned a lot smoother. Um, you're never winning if you're on defense, and if you're explaining why something is wrong, you're going the wrong direction.
Right.
So I think I focus on the values of the party and some of the accomplishments that it's had over the last several decades, and then what we seek to accomplish from here. We have a great infrastructure that's been built by our predecessors, and now it's incumbent upon us to build on top of that.
Absolutely. Well, I think overall, North Dakotans can be excited for the direction of the party. Excited to have you on and your leadership. Thank you for coming on. We know we give guests a chance to say a last word. Is there any closing thoughts that you would like to leave us with?
First and foremost, thank you for having me on. God bless the Republic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chairman Simon. And thank you to all those that joined us online to watch this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe, become part of the Dakota community. Thank you and have a great day.